In a suburb called Charlottenburg outside of Berlin, on March 25, 1906, a baby girl was born to Paul and Marie Gulk. Her name was Charlotte. She was a child in a period of extreme German nationalism, as the rise of the German Empire in the late 19th century allowed for a parallel rise in intense national pride. This pride was dangerous, as it called for the exclusion of many, including liberals, Catholics, and socialists. The Chancellor of Prussia, Otto von Bismarck, was a champion of this nationalism and the call for a unified German Empire that included the German states, Austria, and other territories. Though the roots of this nationalism preceded Charlotte, the consequences of it did not. During the period of World War I, she was a young girl attending school. It is unknown if her father participated in the war, but it is probable, as Germany desperately needed manpower. Just as World War I ended, so did her schooling after she completed 8th grade. Still, she was able to find employment as a clerk in Berlin in the early 1920s. Berlin, when she was a young adult, had a vibrant culture in the arts and sciences, with new innovations in film and architecture, and the work of legends such as Albert Einstein gained notoriety. However, Charlotte still decided to leave her homeland as Germany was in a period of turmoil. Germany had large economic downfalls as a result of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of World War I. The side effects of them paying for the incredible amount of war reparations included hyperinflation, famously portrayed in this photograph of children playing with money rather than toys. The Weimar Republic that was in charge at this point was deemed constitutionally weak, and society was very divided economically, socially, and politically. In 1926, Charlotte left Germany at the age of 20 from the port of Bremen on a ship named the Berlin. She arrived in New York on November 21st, and 11 days later, she married her first husband, Kurt Lorenz, and with that marriage acquired a stepson, Henry. On November 21st, 1926, she declared her intention for citizenship. The couple settled in Brooklyn for a few years, where Charlotte was a housewife and took care of the domestic sphere. Unfortunately for Charlotte, her husband Kurt died of tuberculosis in the late 1920s to early 1930s. The exact date is unknown. However, after the death of her first husband, Charlotte married her second husband, Henry Schluter, in Brooklyn, New York, on March 1st, 1933, when she was 26 years old. He too had immigrated from Germany, though his parents were probably born in Denmark. According to my father, Henry Schluter was a sheet metal worker, which was a profession many German immigrants had at that time, and it became a trade that many members of my family later would work in. Her first son, Robert Schluter, was born 2 years later in 1935. During the period of World War II in America, Charlotte's family was a target for anti-German sentiments. Because of the persecution of Jewish people and others in Germany before and during World War II, 114,000 Germans fled to the U.S. When the war broke out, Americans became extremely suspicious of German-born people. In 1940, the United States passed the Alien Registration Act of 1940, which required 300,000 German citizens to register their presence in the country. This caused them to have limited property, owning, and travel abilities. Also, 11,000 German citizens were interned. Of course, this was only a fraction of the number of Japanese interned, but is still relevant. Luckily for Charlotte, she did not have to go through this, as she had been settled long enough in the States. However, her son Robert was beat up at school for his German heritage and the slight German accent he had. After World War II, life in the United States settled down for Charlotte and her family for a while, as she raised her children. My father's mother, Rosemary Schluter, was born on September 8, 1945. Afterwards, according to her son Robert, his mother began to do odd jobs. She was a housekeeper for a brief time, but her more permanent occupation was making German salads for a German deli. However, around the 1950s, tragedy struck. Her second husband, Henry, died at age 56 on June 29, 1955, after the couple had been married 22 years. Her stepson, Henry Lorenz, was involved in the Merchant Marines, and he also died on an oil tanker around the same time. However, she carried on and managed to live her life to the fullest. One of her best friends who was with her through this time was a woman named Hilda, who was rather extraordinary. She left Germany around the same time as Charlotte, but returned there to be a translator during World War II. After she came back, she had a common-law marriage with a certain Jewish man. They remained close friends throughout her life and is seen in pictures with her. In the 1960s, her daughter Rosemary began to have children after she married her first husband, Kenneth Olson. Charlotte was fond of her two grandsons, Kenneth Jr. and John Olson, the former being my father. Kenneth had a lot to say about her.
Grandma Schluter lived in Brooklyn on Voorhees Avenue, and she had an interesting backyard. It was kind of like a garden-y type thing that she had, but it wasn't really a vegetable garden. It was just like a hangout garden. She was, I guess, what you would call old school. Never saw her in pants, always in a house dress or a dress of some sort. And actually I remember the old Ringer type washing machine in her basement too. We'd go visit her, and she had lots of little knickknacks, lots of plates, some Hummels from Germany. And it was a narrow row house, but she lived there probably for close to 50 years, because that's when my mother grew up, and then she lived down there. She lived there until my mother moved her down to Florida. She was a good cook. I remember chicken and dumplings, which was a great thing, which is actually just like a chicken stew with dough-type dumplings on top that were baked, rouladen, thin strips of steak with different pickled ingredients tied together. There were still pictures around of her son that passed away in the 50s and her husband that passed away in the 50s, even into the 80s when we were there.
He also told me that though she did not speak of her life in Germany often, she did not hide her German heritage either, and often went back to visit. Towards the end of her life, she was still heavily involved with her family. Her daughter Rosemary remarried and had another son, Chris Osowitz. In 1989, she attended the wedding of my parents, Kenneth Olson and Kathy Hanft. Charlotte afterwards moved to Daytona, Florida, to be close to her daughter Rosemary. 5 years later, she attended the christening of her grandson Garrett Olson and is seen here playing with my brother Dan in 1995. On February 21st, 1996, she died at the age of 89 in Daytona of natural causes. Though she is gone, her legacy lives on in her grandchildren from my father's side of the family, Chris, Kenneth Jr., and John. There are still many things that remain a mystery about Charlotte, and I'm sad I never got to meet her. But through this project, I was able to glimpse into her extraordinary life and see how her choices shaped how my family